We meet again for our annual discussion about city finances. This is the release of our annual comprehensive the comprehensive annual financial report. And let me first just thank Hadiza Buhari and Doug Anderson for the work. Certainly Hadiza's group, the accounting group. This is their big product every year, and we spend the whole first quarter just getting this report ready with all the various component units, and a lot of work goes into it. And Hadiza, thank you very much for your work, and Doug, thank you for helping put this together. I'm not going to go too far into every piece of this information, but I know there are a couple of things that people are particularly interested in, and I'll leave it for questions for other things that you have. I will make reference to the fact that this report again received the award for outstanding financial reporting. Of course, that would have been last year, so we'll again submit this report for it again. But we've received that every year since I've been here, and from the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, and so just continue to try to put forth best practices in financial reporting. The first thing, and this is just sort of the operating result of how the city operated last year, and you can see that we had another surplus year, total revenues of $545 million, expenditures of $431 million. That does not include monies that's transferred to other funds, so there's an additional $90 million in spending for transfers. We transfer money to pay our debt service, and we transfer money to for capital projects to supplement our capital program. So we end up with a surplus of $17.2 million. Again, a very good year, not as strong as last year, but a very solid year performance-wise with a large operating surplus. And just to get a sense of where that money comes from, this is a look at our taxes. And I really wanted to show this graphic mainly to make the point that I've made here several times, that over half of our funding and taxes comes from two sources: earned income and real estate. And I say that mainly because what that tells you is that the bulk of our tax burden is paid for by people who live here. And that continues to be a problem for Pittsburgh because our population continues to shrink. So as more and more people leave the city, we have less tax base. I also raise it to show you that our largest source of revenue, our real estate tax, as you know, is much of which is exempt from taxation. 40% of the property in the city of Pittsburgh is exempt from taxation. So you can see the struggles that we have just given those two facts. You know, when we talk about tax exempt property, obviously we're talking about some of our largest employers who again, not only do they not pay the real estate tax, they also don't pay the payroll prep tax, which is our third largest source, and again for another year are not paying in lieu of taxes. So we've now had 4 years, and this year will be our fifth, of no payment in lieu of tax arrangement with our largest nonprofits. I think that's a major problem, a major failure, that we've gone this long without an agreement. You know, in the years prior to 4 years ago, from 2013 back, we were at least getting, you know, $3-4 million a year from our nonprofits, and that was without a contribution from UPMC because they were contributing to the Pittsburgh Promise at that time. Well, now, you know, the Promise commitment is over, and we're still not getting any kind of payment in lieu of agreement. I keep hearing that it's in the works. I haven't been part of the conversations, and maybe you guys can ask the administration what's going on there, because it's a real failure that we're not getting that revenue. We probably walked away from something north of $20 million over the last few years that should have been brought into the city. I'd also just talk a little bit about the parking tax, which is also one of our bigger sources. When you combine parking tax also with just parking revenues that the city receives for meters, for the Mon Wharf, you know, those kind of revenues, it's an enormous source of revenue for us. And I only raise it to just start thinking about this, and we're going to start talking about this as we move to the future. You know, people keep talking about increased rideshare opportunities, increased biking opportunities, increased public transit opportunities. You know, what does that mean in the future with respect to parking tax? I don't think it's an immediate concern. I still think people very much like to drive their own car to work and park downtown, but But I think as we move to the future, it's one of the things that we're going to have to start thinking about. What will parking revenues look like 20 years from now? And is that going to be a source that we can continue to rely on, particularly given the fact that we're taking a big chunk of that to help pay our pension obligations? I'll talk about some of these other sources a little bit later. Just to show you where the money goes, I think a very interesting graphic. 61% of what we bring in goes to public safety. Police, fire, EMS. Both of these graphics are actually in the report, in the initial transmittal letter in the report, so you can see them there too. But 61% public safety, police, fire, and EMS. Not to pick on our big hospitals again, but we're delivering patients to them every day. You'd think they'd want to help us out a little bit. So that's I think just an interesting graphic as to where your money goes and what we can do about that. This is the number that everyone wants to talk about. Based on that $17 million surplus. If you take you account for some of the transfers and some of the other activities, we end up with an end balance. This is our unrestricted fund balance. This is the savings account, so to speak, of $110 million. So we had a very good year again. And let's remember, this was a year where council and the mayor, in their wisdom, decided to raise taxes. This is one of the arguments we were making last year, was that not only was that tax increase unnecessary, it was also counterproductive to the goal of affordable housing. So, but you can see that was the result for last year. I'm going to talk about a couple of the, I'm losing my, there we go, sorry, let me go back to that. A couple of the sources of revenue, the earned income tax. This is something that we just have been talked about every year for the last few years, and you can see that we continue to have a significant growth in this revenue source, which is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, part of this increase is a result of what happened back here in 2012, where we had this big jump because of the Act 32, which changed the way we collect earned income tax and the way that employers have to withhold income tax. So we saw that big jump, but that has continued on as collections continue to get better, which is one of the reasons you see this higher number. But that's not the whole story, obviously. Wages, salaries are going up in the city of Pittsburgh. City residents are making more money. On average, median income is up in the city of Pittsburgh, and that's reflected here. Now, interestingly, median income has two sides, right? Median income is up because some people are making more money. Median income is also up because some people who aren't making more money have left the city. So as lower wage workers leave the city, which is happening, and higher wage workers are moving in, that has that effect of raising the median income and also the overall earned income tax collections. We also think that there's an interesting dynamic going on with respect to jobs outside the city. Because it appears that a lot of people in the city are working in jobs outside the city. And that makes sense given the job growth we've seen, particularly in the energy industry, where a lot of those jobs aren't in the city, they're outside the city, and in other fields, as some of our headquarters have opted for suburban locations. We see that change of people moving, of jobs moving out. The reason I say that is because of this. This is the local services tax, and as you can see, again, flat. So we're not creating jobs within the city. So we're seeing income growth, but not job growth. And this is sort of a reflection of how, this is your $52 tax that you pay if you work in the city of Pittsburgh. So you can see that that we're not adding jobs. And this is one of the few categories where we can see the effect of the large nonprofits, because this is an individual tax that individuals who work at those facilities pay. So we're so we can see that the effect of that. Let me go on to just some of the other taxes. The deed transfer tax, which is the tax that was increased last year, This would not reflect that increase. These are last year's numbers. The increase didn't go into effect until February of this year. But we say we had an increase in that, which was coming off of a record year. We have another year of so another record year indeed, transfer taxes, real estate increases, parking increase, amusement increase. So we've seen increases in just about every tax category other than the local services tax. So part of the reason the city's done well. I'm going to talk a little bit about the big problems, and as you can see, we've talked about this, I think, every year. Gross bonded debt. This is the amount of money that we've borrowed, and you can see how well the city has done over the years paying down that debt by, at least over the last 7 or 8 years, being much more responsible in new borrowing. Despite the fact that we borrowed $60 million in 2017, we still had a decrease in our bonded debt. So we borrowed $60 million, but we paid off $90 million. With interest and all, it works out to be about a $10 million cut. But still, to be able to cut debt in a year when you're borrowing $60 million just shows you how well we're doing, and we're getting to that point where we're reaching what we've all referred to as the debt cliff. So starting out, after this year, our debt drops significantly this year, and then again next year, and then we're on a much more reasonable debt repayment schedule from there on out. So that's going to enable us to do a lot more financially for the city. So you can see we've done pretty well there. And then this is the invested portfolio of the pension fund, again, up again this year. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this. And this is, if you guys want to look at it, it's on page 16 in the introductory material. It's behind the yellow card that says fiduciary fund statements. But it's page 16 there. And I just want to talk about two things here. One is this is the invested portfolio. So this is the value of the pension fund without the parking asset, right? This is how much money we have in stocks and bonds and other various investment vehicles. And you can see that we had a positive year again, up to almost $450 million in the invested portfolio. I want to talk about this a little bit just because of the way this will change from here on out. Because under the 2018 budget and budgets moving forward, the mayor and council have agreed that they will fully fund the payout. So, as you know, in some years we've actually dipped into this portfolio to pay the pension benefit to our retirees. Well, we're not going to do that anymore. So from here on out, this portfolio will grow based on the market. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to grow every year, but if history tells us anything, we know that over long stretches of time, the market performs positively, and so we will see this portfolio grow over the next 10 years. And even if we were to say grow by 5%, which I think is a very conservative number, we would be, 10 years from now, we'd be, 200 million or more, close to 225 million ahead of this number. So this is the opportunity now that we have with our pension. If the city can continue to do what it plans to do over the next 5 years, we'll be able to see this portfolio grow without us dipping into it to help pay the pension benefit. So we're basically going pay as you go on pensions from here on out. Now that's it. We're able to do that for a couple of reasons. One is because we're now collecting, we're taking $26 million in parking tax revenues that will go into this fund every year. This year we got $22 million from state pension aid, so if we can count on that moving forward, and then we get about $12 million from the employees, and then the city fills in the rest. So we're in a much different situation today than we were when I started here in 2008. We've come a long way, and we still have a long way to go. But we're moving in the right direction, and so we're finally seeing that we might just actually solve this pension problem as we move forward. The other thing that on that page, on page 16, is what you'll see what's going on to the Apep Trust Fund, which I just want to talk about briefly. I think that's the end of these slides, yeah. So let me just talk a little bit about the Apep Trust Fund. As you know, or maybe the over the last couple of years, we've had to begin, the the GASB rules require us to report all of our liabilities and account for them on our balance sheet, right? So we've got this big deficit. You know, we have 450 million here, but we know we have what's the word? We have a liability of $1.2 billion, you know, so we're still 800 million behind what we need here, right? But also on the OPEB side, when the OPEB are the other pension or other employee benefits, so other post-employment benefits, okay? That's what OPEB is. For a lot of our employees, we pay health care, right? So a lot of employees, a lot of particularly uniform employees, we pay their health care in retirement. And so that's the bulk of what that liability is, and it's around $500 million that we owe over the next however many years. Now, we ended that in 2005, so new hires after 2005 don't get that anymore. So that's a liability that over time will go away, but it's going to take a long time. So, and it's a liability that increases every year, right? So healthcare goes up every year. So we're now paying around $20 million a year in post-employment benefits. That number's going to grow. Could grow to 30 million, maybe it'll grow to 28 million, I don't know, over the next 10 years. And then it probably 10 to 12 years from now, it'll start to shrink again because people will be off of the rolls. So the question is, how do you fund that moving forward? Right now, we're funding it pay-as-you-go. We're funding it as part of our regular health care payment. So we created the OPEB trust fund to help deal with those peak years. 10 or 12 years from now. And as you can see on the report today, we've got about $20 million in that fund. Now, that's a drop in the bucket of what we need. But unlike most municipalities across the country, we are actually trying to fund this thing. You know, everyone's required to report it. We're actually going to fund it. And so the goal is that in those years where we have that top year where we have to pay out 29 or 30 million, to use some of this money to kind of flatten that peak. So maybe there'll be 6 or 7 years, we'll take 3 or 4 million out of this money, and this money's going to continue to grow. We're going to continue to fund it for the next 10 years. At that point, we'll know how much we have and what our liability is and how much we're going to be able to use each year to lower those peak years. So maybe we top that out, instead of topping out at 30 million one year, maybe we top that out at 25 million and pay 25 million for a number of years before we see it start to fall down again. So I just wanted to make clear what that fund is and the fact that it's there. That while we're not contributing that much to it, $2.5 million a year, it is growing, and it's going to be available to us when we get to those peak years. I'll stop there for now. I just want to reiterate a couple of things. We've got this huge debt that we're dealing with, $93 million in subsidies last year, $99 million in fringe benefits that we paid last year. $69 million in pension costs directly out of the budget last year. And other than the debt, those numbers are growing. And so we're going to use that reduction in debt to help pay those fringes and those pension costs moving forward. So I'll leave it at that. Again, it was a good year. It wasn't as good as last year. It was good enough that we didn't need to raise taxes last year, in my opinion. And so I'll leave it at that and take questions.
You've cautioned against returning to spending habits that evoke the pre-Act 47 era. Have you seen any actions by City Council or by the Mayor's office that begin to move back in that direction? Yeah,
there's a lot of discussion up there about new spending initiatives, and we haven't really evaluated any of them on a financial terms. The one thing I'll say is encouraging was that the recent discussion with the uniformed employees about health care and future health care were all in terms of using current dollars to pay that added cost rather than the situation we have now with this liability. So those discussions aren't going to grow that liability, which I think is a positive thing. But council, we passed a lot of language last year to keep a lot of the Act 47 protections in place. With respect to debt, with respect to spending in general, with respect to being realistic in our assumptions. So I think all those things are helpful, but I just think every time council talks about spending, we've got to be very cautious about what that means, particularly if it means adding to future liabilities, whether they be pension or OPEB. So. Let me just briefly. There's one other thing I did want to talk about today. After I forgot about it in my notes here. A couple stories that were written over the last 2 days. We talked this about. We raised this deed transfer tax, and the discussion around the deed transfer tax was that the money was going to be used to create an affordable housing trust fund. And that money was then going to be used out in all of the neighborhoods to do these great small projects to help people stay in their homes. And then I read in the Post-Gazette this morning that they want to use that money to give to the Penguins to close a gap on the Penguin development. This is exactly the kind of stuff we were talking about last year as to why this is a problem, just passing this without getting more detailed on how that money should be spent. It's just counter to everything that we were told last year as to what that money would be used for. And again, I thought it was, while I'm fully supportive of creating the trust fund, I think it should be used in those kind of projects that help people stay in their homes, and also to create those more neighborhood-based projects. And that's clearly not what was intended, as we saw in the paper today. The other thing is, in yesterday's paper, there was a great story about what's going on in real estate in Pittsburgh, and it's accurate. I mean, it's very true that we didn't suffer the difficulties of the housing bust back in 2008. And downtown has changed dramatically since that time. One of the things that's not mentioned, it's sort of mentioned, but not so much mentioned in the story, is one of the things that really changed the downtown real estate market was UPMC deciding to move to the Steel Building. The fact that they left tax-exempt space in Oakland to take taxable space in the Steel Building is one of the things that really changed the office market mix downtown. And so I think that that's one of the driving forces. Granted, there's a lot of what's talked about in there with respect to people wanting to live more downtown, but the role that UPMC played there, I think, shouldn't be dismissed. I mean, I know I'm very critical of them a lot, but that was one of the things that really helped. So long as they never buy that building. If they buy that building, then it's not so great. But for right now, they're in leased space, and it's been a very positive impact on Pittsburgh. And then you add to that just what some of the local colleges are doing. Point Park in particular, bringing more students into downtown to live. It really has dramatically changed Pittsburgh in that brief period of time. And the overall thing I take away from that story is that one of the reasons that Pittsburgh didn't face the housing bubble that so many other communities faced was, I think, we're just smarter than a lot of other communities. We're not speculators. We're not out there. Granted, we have a lot of people who buy real estate and fix it and flip it and do that kind of thing. But can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people when someone came in from out of town and bought a house in Pittsburgh and says, "Oh my God, did you see what they overpaid for that house?" And I think Pittsburghers, they understand the market. I can tell you, I know people who can't wait to get the paper to look at the deed transfers, to see what people are buying their house for and paying for. And so I think we deserve some credit for being a little more savvy than the rest of the country when it comes to real estate valuation and what you can and can't, what you should or shouldn't do. So I'll stop there. So other questions on our yearly report here?
Have there been any rumblings about a sale of the U.S. Steel Building?
Not that I know of. Please, I hope not. I'm not. It just sold not too long ago. No, I don't. I'm not aware of any discussion. I do know this: they continue to take more space, so which is great for the market. But if they get to the point where they become a majority leasehold there, that they have to think about it, I would think, and that's not going to be good for us because that's a huge part of our property tax base. So.
Wall Street. We've had how many years of rising value? How tied is what you're telling us, especially when it comes to pensions and some other things, to what's happening, given the fact that we're now entering a more uncertain future?
Yeah, I mean, this is hard. It's really hard, I think, for individual investors and even for trustees like me who pay attention to this stuff to see the kind of volatility that we've seen so far this year. It's scary. But I think as bad as things were, and as bad as things got in 2008, and this market bottomed in March of 2009, and those 12 months leading to the March of 2009 were just horrific and scary. And yet, here we are now, 10 years later, and we are far above there and far above when and have reached new highs. So I think, there will always be corrections and problems and things that happen in the market that are negative, but when you look at it over the long term, whether it's over a 10 or 20-year period, historically the market does well, even with those big drops. And so, I think that if we're in this position where we've got $450 million that can just run with the market over the life of this pension liability, we're going to grow. The problem is that the pension liability grows too. So it's one of those, it's like chasing a train down the track. The problem is we can't stop, right? We have to keep chasing it. And but we're doing so much better than we were. And part of that is the decision that we made back in 2010 to monetize the parking asset and really allow that money to bolster this pension, and it's really paid off. I know a lot of people were critical at the time, calling it a gimmick, this and that, but it really has. Having for the first time dedicated funding to the pension fund, and now increasing, it's actually doubling this year to $26 million, is really going to make a difference for us moving forward. So, the real question will be, should we extend that lease term? Should we extend the life of that revenue, that future revenue asset? Right now it ends in 2028 or something like that. Should we extend it to 2038 and lock in, so to speak, that revenue into the future? So I think that'll be the next discussion for our pension with respect to the valuation there. So
you mentioned the end of Act 47, and there's in public safety 60-some% of the total expenses here. The contracts expire at the end of this year for all those public safety departments. What do you see? Do you think the city will have enough to be able to handle whatever comes, since Act 47 isn't here anymore? The unions are going to be asking for room.
Well, but here's the thing, and this was the thing about what happened under, negotiating under Act 47 versus not. The only difference is that an arbitrator, in looking at the city's situation, was allowed to consider the city's financial situation in making the award. The truth is, for the last 5 years, even under Act 47, the city's financial situation has been pretty good. We've been generating surpluses in all those years. So, and police and fire have received increases. My guess is that the unions and their leadership are probably looking at this as an opportunity to do a more significant increase. The city is going to have to hold its feet, hold itself to a certain financial standard as to how much that can be. But again, that's all for negotiation. In talking to the leadership, at least of a couple of the unions, police and fire, they understand. They understand that the value of this pension plan. So they know that there's some things that they need to do to let this pension plan continue, and whether that's in terms of looking at retirement ages again, or whether that's in terms of looking at employee contributions again, they understand that those are discussions that are going to be part of any kind of negotiation. At least they should be. I'm not part of the negotiating team, but my sense is that we should be looking at this, that we're willing to do a little more on the wages side if they're willing to do a little more on the pension side, because that's where the problem is. And when you're generating surpluses, as we have been, that gives us an opportunity to craft a reasonable agreement with our employee unions and still improve our situation with these long-term liabilities.
When you say do a little more on the pension side, you mean increase the retirement?
Well, there's a couple of different. Yeah, I think they can. I think there's already some discussion about what retirement ages should be. And there's already some discussions about what contributions should be. If you can, most city employees work to get a pension. They work 20 years and have to be 60. Our public safety unions can retire at 50. So they should be paying, and they pay a little more. They do pay a little more for that. I think even they would say that it's time to really take a look at what retirement age ought to be. And for every year that we can increase that, has significant meaning to our long-term liability. So, and there are other pension reforms as well that will be looked at. But and like I said, at least the conversations I've had with some of our uniformed employees, they're ready. They're ready for that discussion. They also have going for them the fact that they, at least with respect to police, are dramatically underpaid compared to some of our suburban police departments. So we got to deal with that too. And we've become too much of a training ground for police officers. Where we provide this great training at our academy, and they get out of the academy, they're not here long when they're offered positions in some of our suburban districts, making significantly more money. So we've got to address that issue as well. Well, I'm around, and Doug's here, so if you have other questions, contact us. Again, we had a great year, and we're looking forward to a new day of Pitt basketball. So that's always a good thing. All right, thanks, folks.